Hello, welcome back. Or if you're new here, welcome. I'm John. This is a tag video, part of a Booktube tag. Usually we do tags on Tuesday, but today is Monday, and uh, Mike, the creator of this tag I'm about to do, said that he had done 3 takes for his video, and I was kind of grateful to see this video because I have been trying for about 8 or 9 takes to do a video about a convoluted 1970s horror novel. And so when I saw this tag, or when I saw his video and saw uh, or heard the questions and everything, I realized, well, there's one I can do, and maybe that'll serve as some practice so I can get back to making videos about books in specific. But it is the Nonfiction Book Tag. It was created by Mike from Bibliophile Bookscape. I think his channel is called Bibliophile Reads. I think there are 11 questions. I will probably combine the last 2. But it's all about reading nonfiction and nonfiction books. So here we go. So question number 1. What originally made you interested in reading nonfiction? I've been interested in reading nonfiction as long as I can remember, honestly, because I had a relatively tumultuous childhood that was not always pleasant. It certainly wasn't Disney-esque. Um, I learned a lot at a pretty young age about things I really shouldn't have known anything about. And I was very anxious when I was young. And at some point, I seemed to have developed the idea that if I could learn everything there was to know, then I wouldn't have to be scared about anything anymore because I would know exactly what to do in any situation. And that's kind of where that was born out of, so that I became very, very interested in learning fact after fact after fact, as much as I could about anything. I have talked about that before on a video I made about like a wilderness survival guide that I read over and over and over when I was very young. And I have a grandpa who used to take me to the library all the time. And in the before time, in the long, long ago, before we had home computers, he would take me to, he had to go to a college to take some classes for his job every now and then. So he had a pass to use the computers there. And the computers, they were the old school big ones, with the big stack and the big monitor and everything. But they were upstairs in a library. And it was like an open air library. So like the upstairs, you could see into it from the downstairs and everything. It was really nice. So in a way, I spent several years wandering around a college library when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, and nobody ever questioned me. Nobody ever bothered me. I think it was because I was quiet and I minded my own business, and it was really interesting, those books that I was around all the time, uh, because a lot of them were like architecture books that were really neat. There were books on like mass media and that sort of. If you've ever been in a college, like a technical college library, you'll know what I'm talking about. I still dream about it sometimes, which is really interesting. They had couches and chairs and everything. It was really, really nice, and so I was surrounded by all these adult level books all the time, and like I said, nobody ever bothered me. I looked at whatever I wanted to. There were always newspapers lying around, so it was just kind of something that was a part of my life. And those two things combined to where my quest for certainty and knowledge uh, was aided by being around all these college books. It was really nice. It was a nice escape too from everything else that was going on. Number 2, do you read nonfiction mainly for curiosity, learning, or enjoyment? Can't read my own handwriting. I would say that for me, those 3 things are really intertwined to the point where I cannot pull them apart. Uh, I try to learn from every single book that I read, not just nonfiction, but fiction also. I know there are some people who say that you can't really learn anything from fiction, but even the worst fiction book can teach you quite a bit about how to write and how not to write, how to sculpt characters, how to write setting and plot, and one thing that poorly written fiction will really do well for you if you pay attention is it will teach you how to write dialogue that is not awful, um, or it should anyway. But for me, nonfiction, the 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 elements of curiosity, learning, and enjoyment are all mixed together. And I don't read any books that I'm not interested in at all. Uh, I try to learn from every book that I read, and I do learn from every book that I read, I think, in a way. Maybe I'm not always conscious of the way that I am learning. And I I rarely force myself through a book I'm not enjoying. It doesn't mean that I won't enjoy it later on, but I'm not enjoying it now, and for me personally, it's just better to move on to something else. And I have so many books to choose from, and there are so many books in the world that even on the same topic, if you are not enjoying a book by one author, you can put that aside and find a book by another author that you almost certainly will enjoy on the same topic. So for me, I don't know how to pull those apart and quantify them in separate categories. They're all really part of a whole for me. Um, Number 3, what topic could you read endless nonfiction about? Well, see, I don't think there is one because I will admit that I have a need for novelty. Not in that I need new topics constantly, but that I don't like to read, say, a book about mountain climbing and then read another book about mountain climbing. I don't want to read a book about the Vietnam War and then read another book about the Vietnam War, or a book about ships and then another book about ships. So I have done that sometimes, but I really prefer to read like something on psychology and then read something about like, uh, I don't know, maybe one of Bill Bryson's travel books, or uh, maybe, well, I mean, you could have endless combinations of this, but I wouldn't want to read, um, I don't like to read about the same topic back to back. I like to read about a topic and then move on to a different one. But there are lots of topics that I'm really, really interested in. Um, Ships, submarines, war in the 20th century. I used to be really, really interested in psychology. I still am. I just don't read as much as I used to about it. Um, there are quite a few topics that I have main topics. I think that's a part of another question later on. So we will move on to question 4. How do you usually discover nonfiction books? So, like I mentioned earlier, I used to wander around libraries a lot. I haven't been to a library in quite some time, just for the fact that um, most libraries don't have what I am looking for. Now, I do live within driving distance of the University of Kentucky, and like I'm right by there all the time, and I know that I could probably get a pass and go in there and use their library if I wanted to. I've looked into it. I can't remember exactly. I think you just have to get like a pass and then you can go in. I don't know if you can check out books, but you can definitely go in if you want. That would be really interesting, but I'm sort of at a point in my life where I really don't want to be around college kids. Um, Nothing wrong with college kids or anything. It's just we don't have a lot in common most of the time. Most of the time. Um, and of course, in a library, it wouldn't matter. I could just hide myself off somewhere, I guess. Um, where were we here? How do you usually discover nonfiction books? So most of the time I go to like thrift stores, I go to Goodwills and stuff like that. I go to bookstores and wander around, and I just have areas of these places where I gravitate towards, or books that I'm looking for. And a lot of times I will find books that I've never heard of before, and just, hey, that looks interesting, and I just buy it because it's $1 or $1.49. Um, I do have a Goodreads. I don't use it very often anymore. I use it for one thing really only, which is to keep like a digital record of the books that I have read so that I can just go and scroll through them easily. I also keep track of books just in a notebook. I don't really use my Goodreads for anything else. I've never written any reviews on there. I don't have any. I heard from someone recently that they have taken direct messaging away, which is, I can kind of understand why they did that, but back during the pandemic, I was messaged by the author Tim Butcher, and that was really neat. I didn't respond. I was too shy to respond. I had just read his book. I cannot remember which one it was. It wasn't Trigger, but it was the one that recounts his journey through the Congo on his own. Um, but anyway, that's sort of neither here nor there. We were all around the world pretty bored, I think, and I guess he was just messaging whoever. Um, or maybe that was automated. I have no idea. I don't know how any of that worked, but it was an interesting thing. Um, but I learned through a lot about a lot of books through Amazon, just the recommended books on Amazon when I was in my teens, and then I got a Goodreads about 14 years ago, and I used to go through the recommendations on there a whole lot. So I learned a whole lot about books just by doing that, just by looking through all those books. And so I have a pretty good idea of what I am looking for. Sometimes I have learned about books through the bibliography on other books. I don't do that quite as often as I used to, just because in most of the books I read, it's rather hard to find certain books in the bibliography, or it's hard to buy books that are listed in the bibliography of books that are 50 or 60 years old. Um, and Booktube, of course, I've learned about quite a lot of books on Booktube, but I tend to, I'm very independent about how I choose books. I'm very independent about looking for books, and so, and my taste is rather eclectic, if you haven't noticed, and so I find myself drawn to books that most booktubers don't seem to be drawn to, or rather, it's that my tastes are so eclectic and my book searching is so independent that my my interests very rarely actually intersect with those of others in a way that would make us I don't know how to explain that, but I, I'm very independent is what I'm trying to say. And so I do hear about books from other booktubers, and I sometimes take note of them, or I put them on my Goodreads list, or whatever. Um, but mostly it's just a matter of wandering around finding what I'm interested in at different places. Uh, Number 5. Do you follow authors or topics when choosing nonfiction? Well, I'm going to go ahead and say topics mainly, but there are authors I like. I like Walter Lord. I like John Krakauer, for instance. Barbara Tuchman. David McCullough is pretty good. There's some of his books here. I haven't read most of them. I've read a couple of them. Um, Cornelius Ryan, for instance. Bill Bryson. So, but mainly, I won't read the works of an author just because that author wrote them. So I would say mainly it's topic. Mainly it's topic. Question 6. What nonfiction book stuck with you long after reading? So there have been many because I've read a lot of nonfiction. Um, I would say that one that has stuck with me quite a long time is Eric Schlosser's Fast Food Nation. Specifically, some of the stuff in that book it's about how the fast food industry works, and also about um, like how industrial slaughterhouses work, uh, how these restaurants sometimes are breeding grounds for bacteria, and the things that those bacteria can do to older people and very young people. Uh, like you don't really particularly want to read about what salmonella can do if it gets in the bones of a 6 or 7 year old. Um, and also just how dangerous it can be to work in fast food restaurants. But then, for instance, Schlosser's book, Command and Control, where you read about how nuclear weapons were stored, how the crews in the bunkers tested their missiles. They would have live missiles, and they would go through these practice drills. This was in the 50s, I think, and they would turn the keys on live missiles, and the countdown would go 1, 2, 3, and on 3 they would turn the keys off. So that'll stick with you a while. But there have been psychology books that have stuck with me just because they taught me something about myself, or rather, they enabled me to learn something about myself. But there have been lots and lots of books that have stuck with me, and to sit here and name them all would be rather difficult. Not the least because I have trouble actually remembering certain books off the top of my head. But if you ask me about them, I can tell you all about them. It's one of the frustrating things about doing this, actually, is the amount of books that I have read is pretty large, actually, and I have terrible recall. But if you put the book in front of me, I can tell you all about it. Usually, unless I'm in front of a camera, apparently. Question 7. What topic have you learned the most about through books? So I've learned a lot about a lot through books. And I was kind of answering this question earlier, but I've learned a lot about, like I said, warfare in the 20th century. So World War I, World War II, and Vietnam, for instance. I've learned a lot about psychology, particularly Jungian psychology, submarines and submarine warfare, ships. I've learned about a lot. I have a lot of very wide interests. So travel, different countries, all sorts of things, and you can see I'm sort of searching for things to think about. But I have read a lot of books about a lot of stuff, and so I've learned a lot about a lot. And I was thinking about this earlier, and it's one of the most interesting things about reading that tends to be overlooked. But the nice thing about nonfiction is you can pick up a book that is 1,000 years old or 3,000 years old, and you can learn about what people's lives were like. Do you want to know what it was like to be on the Lusitania in 1915? Do you want to know what it was like to, I don't know, fly a Zeppelin over Britain in World War I? Do you want to know what it was like to live in the 18th century or whatever? I mean, nonfiction books like that are a window into a world different from our own, or they are a window into parts of our contemporary world that we don't usually get to see into. I feel like I'm going off topic. Where are we? Okay, no, not really off topic, but my point is that you can learn. If you are willing to learn, if you have an open mind, you can learn from any book you pick up, even if all you learn is, I don't like the way this author writes. Question number 8. What nonfiction book made you curious about something unexpected? I can't think of anything directly off the top of my head, but I would say that there are times when I read books when I am drawn to other topics, or I find an interest in things that I didn't know I was interested in. But to name one off the top of my head is not the easiest thing in the world. Like I wouldn't know what to say. And usually it's rather a small thing, right? So I don't know exactly how I would answer that one. I'm really bad with recall like that. Okay, number 9. What topic would you recommend everyone explore at least once? So there are lots of them, right? The civil rights movement in the United States, the Holocaust, the rise of Nazi Germany, the Soviet Gulag system, the Cold War. There are all kinds of topics I think people should learn about. Like I said, Eric Schlosser's Fast Food Nation. That is something that is so ubiquitous throughout our culture that most people don't know anything about. But it's genuinely disturbing. Or Command and Control, about how nuclear weapons are stored, how they have had nuclear weapons incidents over the past 70, 75 years. there are all kinds of topics, you know, and I think really, though, it's more important for readers to find topics that they themselves are interested in and go from there, because that interest in one thing will lead to interest in another thing and interest in another thing, and it's, a mini branched tree, and the branches never end. You just keep climbing through it. So question number 10 is, what nonfiction book would you recommend to curious readers? And question number 11 is, what nonfiction book would you give someone who says they don't like nonfiction? And I think these two things are actually rather intertwined. I think you can answer both questions together. So, um, if you are someone who doesn't like nonfiction, you only really think you don't like nonfiction. And it's probably because you haven't found nonfiction that is written in an engaging way on a topic in which you are interested. And so, one of the best things that you can do is to find a book that is written in an engaging way about a topic you are interested in. And for a curious reader, the answer is really the same. Find an interesting book about a topic you are interested in, and read it. And if you just find a topic that you're interested in, you will be open to all these books on that topic. Some are going to be dry and academic. Some are going to be very engaging. They're what they call popular accounts, popular books about subjects. And they may not have the depth of a more academic text, but you need to start at the popular books. You need to start at the books that are written for a general audience, for a wide audience. And then you can narrow that down to reading more academically written books, more in-depth books. And um, that is your best bet. Start wide, start easy. I know that, and I don't mean that in a condescending way or anything like that. It's just you need to be hooked by nonfiction. And if you spend enough time with that and you enjoy that enough, you will gradually find yourself going down to the harder, the more difficult books, the books that take more focus, that are more focused on certain topics. Don't know if I'm explaining that very well, but I went downstairs. That's where I keep all the books, not all the books, but many of the books that I have read and that I may need to read again at some point. And I just went through them, and I found a list of books that I would recommend if you are interested in certain subjects. Books that are easy to read but are also very interesting. So if you're interested in ancient Egypt, you could read The Search for the Gold of Tutankhamen by Arnold Brackman. That's a very good book. It's about how Lord Carnarvon and Howard Carter found the tomb of Tutankhamen and what was inside it. And it's a very interesting story. It's a very good story. If you want to know what it was like to go on an expedition to the South Pole, you can read Endurance by Alfred Lansing, which is about a failed attempt to reach the South Pole by Ernest Shackleton and his crew, and their escape from this frozen waste. You can read the two books I mentioned earlier, Command and Control and Fast Food Nation by Eric Schlosser. Those are both very accessible. If you are interested in, say, 9/11, what happened on 9/11 in the World Trade Center, you could read 102 Minutes by Jim Dwyer and Kevin Flynn. If you'd like to know what it is like what it was like to live in the tumultuous 14th century, you could read Barbara Tuchman's A Distant Mirror. That would be in Europe, of course, during the Black Plague, and I think there was some kind of papal schism going on. There was a lot of warfare going on in Europe at the time, lots of mercenaries and things like that. If you want to know what it was like in the early days and then through the First World War, you could read Ernst Junger's Storm of Steel, which is the first-hand account of what it was like to be an infantry soldier during the First World War, from the very beginning until the end. You could read Salvation on Sand Mountain by Dennis Covington, if you've ever wondered what it's like to be in a snake-handling Christian church in southern Appalachia in the 90s. Joel Glenn Brenner's The Emperors of Chocolate, which is a fantastic account of the of Milton Hershey and the Hershey Company, and also the Mars family and the Mars Corporation. So you have these two competing candy empires, and what the people in those families were like, what Milton Hershey was like, what Forrest Mars Sr. and Forrest Mars Jr. were like, what his children are like. That's a very good book, actually. You might not believe me. That is a really, really good book. Uh, and those brands are all around us, and they own much more than just candy companies. So if you've ever wondered what it's like to be an associate in an American mafia family, an Italian American mafia family, you could read Nicholas Pileggi's Wise Guy, which is an account of Henry Hill in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. If you wondered what the Dust Bowl, the Great Depression, was like in the Midwest, you could read Timothy Egan's The Worst Hard Time, which is a pretty good book. If you wonder what it is like for an American guy to go to Australia and wander around, you could read In a Sunburned Country by Bill Bryson. If you have ever wondered what it would be like to be a castaway adrift in a little boat for, well, it's not even a little boat, it's a little rubber raft for months, you could read Stephen Callahan's account, Adrift, of a time when he spent something like 3 or 4 months in a tiny rubber raft floating about in the Atlantic Ocean. If you wonder what it's like to climb Mount Everest, what it is like to be trapped in a storm on Mount Everest, you can read John Krakauer's Into Thin Air. So those are just some of my recommendations. And I have really enjoyed this tag because, like I said, it was much easier to do than the horror novel review I was trying to do. And I'm really enjoyed this, and I hope that I have given some good answers. Uh, I hope that horror novel thing will go well, but who knows? I want to thank Mike for creating this tag, and I don't know if I'll tag anyone. I don't usually tag anybody anymore, but I might. Uh, so that was the Nonfiction Book Tag, created by Mike from Bibliophile Bookscape, and I've really enjoyed it. And hopefully I will be able to edit this and post this today. This is the 9th, and it is 1:20. And if you can't tell, I am severely out of practice with all this Booktube stuff. But I want to thank you for joining me today, and I will see you next time.